So we'll go ahead and get started with our next talk, which is Uncovering Hidden Rhythms, Reimagining the Soundscapes of Southern California's Music History. And I'll go ahead and present our speakers today, which is Roberto Viramontes. He is the Executive Director of Fairplex Learning and Development Center, FLDC, an educational nonprofit organization in Pomona. FLDC offers a wide range of programs, including early care and education, arts education, career technical education, and youth engagement initiatives for opportunities youth. However, Roberto first began his career in education, began as a high school social science teacher, where he taught U.S. history and U.S. government, as a graduate student in history at Cal State LA. So Cal State LA alum. Yeah. Roberto developed projects centered on music history, podcasts exploring themes such as the reimagining spaces that supported the growth of LA musicians in 1980s and 1990s, as well as a complex symbolic relationship between narco culture and popular music in Mexico. Roberto is a proud East Los Angeles native and graduate of local public schools, including Garfield High School. He holds a BA in history from California State University, Fullerton, and has earned multiple advanced degrees in masters in history from California State University, Los Angeles, a master's of public policy from the University of Southern California, and a master's in education from Loyola Marymount University. And our second speaker is Paul Morgana. Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. Is a first generation US born member of an immigrant family from Bolivia. Proudly born in Boyle Heights, he was raised throughout the greater Los Angeles area before his family ultimately settled in Southgate. While Southeast LA became home, he spent his formative junior high and high school years in East Los Angeles, graduating from Garfield High School. It was during his senior year that he began playing drums and joined his first band, sparking a lifelong passion for music. He went on to attend UC Santa Cruz, where he studied history and education during his junior year. Paul studied abroad in England, became an on-air DJ for the university's radio station, and joined a band performing covers of artists like Nirvana and Nine Inch Nails. After college, Paul pursued a career in education, teaching 12th grade government and economics for 15 years. Throughout his teaching career, his involvement in music remained strong, performing, recording, and touring across the Southwest with multiple bands and collaborating with musicians from diverse genres. Paul's dual passions for history and music have shaped his understanding of the cultural and societal impact of sound. He continues to collaborate, and remains committed to lifelong learning and creative exchange. All right, there you go. Thank you so much, and I'll let you all get started.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Roberto, and today my co-host for today, Paul and I, will be presenting on a podcast project that we did a couple of years out. It's part of my master's program here at Cal State LA, and so it was a podcast project focused on local history here across LA. So when it comes to the background, yeah, this podcast piece was part of a graduate school project of mine, and it was here when I was doing the MA program in history, and the idea to do the podcast was I was looking to do something fun. I think I was tired of the research papers a little bit, but I wanted to do something really cool that would speak to music history locally. And so I came up with the idea of a podcast, and I did that for the class. It was History 5800. My professor at the time, Professor Christopher Andy, he's right here. I did it for his class, and it was Professor Andy who encouraged us to be here today to present. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here. But when it comes to doing the podcast, it's like, how do we deliver historical content in a fun way, in an innovative way, but it's still research based, right? It's still research based. So I started thinking about that a little bit. And in terms of what we could do, it was at that moment in time when I brainstormed what kind of music history I could cover, I decided to do it on focusing on lesser known stories of local music history here in LA. So with that, I was like, well, let's go ahead and do that. But I started researching other music history podcasts, those with a single host and those with 2 or more hosts. And then once I heard enough of podcasts there where there's a single host just speaking to the mic, I decided I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'd rather have a little more of the give and take, a couple of perspectives kind of bounce around. So who else than a longtime buddy of mine for well over 30 years, Paul, who, when I was thinking about who else I could do this with, well, nobody else knows more about music history than Paul. So I enlisted him in the project. Professor Andy was okay with it, so I was like, all right, let's do it. So we finally decided to do the research together, and we try to have a little bit of fun with it. So even though it's one episode, it's a one episode podcast, we gave it a name, right? So we called it Historical Soundscapes. And so with it, I was able to enlist Paul to kind of go over what we could do together in terms of the topic, right? So we decided to focus on, to do an exploration, right, of young artists across LA. So, and specifically, when we're talking about lesser known stories of music history here across LA, we focused on spaces, physical spaces that were reimagined or renegotiated to allow more young artists to be able to perform and hone in their craft as an artist. So with it is like this very much is underground, right? Where maybe young artists during the 70s and 80s and other spaces were kind of had to be reimagined in some way, shape, or form to allow more people to participate, to make it more inclusive from an artistic and musical standpoint. We started focusing on ideas and examples to tell that specific story. And so with this episode, so physical spaces, not just venues, right, but music creation and artistic expression, and how that had to kind of be revamped and reimagined in order for those histories to actually take place, right? And so, but also, how are they a reflection of what was taking place across LA at that moment in time, with the 70s and 80s and so forth. And so we asked a couple of questions. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it up to you.
So part of it was, as I was asked, first it came about in his basement, or pseudo basement in his house in Highland Park with a couple of whiskeys in hand and just our normal banter and conversation. We've known each other since we were both in junior high school, and so it just became as me as coming in as a potential consultant. As our conversation grew and more, the ping pong of conversation topics went, and then that's when I was enlisted to kind of come in and be basically a co-host of this idea. So we wanted to ask 2 fundamental questions. As we both being historians, we wanted to definitely base this on evidence-based research. He told me a little bit about the course that he was taking with Professor Endy and the topics and the books, and so we wanted to first ask what kinds of access and opportunities do these spaces provide, and we really wanted to hone in on this idea of inclusivity and exclusivity, speaking of what spaces are allowed and in particular geographical places, and spaces for folk of color. Automatically you've got this context of folk of color are marginalized in the larger sense, and so now musically and artistically now there's another layer of being denied access to a space, and so that's where the spaces just kept, the concept of the physical space kept coming up over and over in our conversation. And so we wanted to ask that first question. And secondly, what do they reveal about the social and cultural fabric of those communities? As we started to look into the different spaces geographically across LA County, they were diverse in their nature. And so then we started to look at those particular regions specifically. And so while all this stuff is vast and huge, we wanted to focus our discussion around these 4 key focal points that anchored our conversation and allowed us to start to do kind of a archaeological dig to kind of deepen our understanding of those spaces, while also incorporating some of our own experiences. And later on in the presentation, I'll share a couple of the spaces that I had the fortune in the 90s to be a part of, to kind of then bring in a little bit more of that personal insight to some of these larger questions.
Yeah, so in terms of the focal points for the podcast, we focus on these examples. So number 1, the Allen Theater in Southgate. Number 2, the Rainbow Gardens in Pomona. The American Legion Hall in El Monte. Backyards across all of LA for purposes of two different types of scenes. The punk scene in the 70s and 80s, and also the DJ scene in the 80s and early 90s. So this is what we focused our podcast on when it comes to renegotiated spaces to allow for a more inclusive artistic expression of young artists all over LA. So with the first one, focal point, the Allen Theater, this is yours, Paul.
So we'll start off with Southgate is here in Southeast LA. Like I said, I was raised in Southgate after several stints across Pico Union, Koreatown, Hollywood. My family in the late 80s decided I was able to purchase a home, and so that became home. And Southgate is one of those towns that had its industrial boom through the 1960s and 70s, and then along with all of the different issues going on with industry in the United States. This former middle-class white Jewish neighborhood in the 70s, as white flight left a lot of that kind of pocket of cities in Southeast LA, Cudahy, Maywood, Huntington Park, that vacuum was left and filled with a bunch of immigrant families coming, mostly from Latin America, but again diverse as well. And life continued like a lot of those places. And so the Allen was a movie theater that from the 1930s served as an Art Deco style in their main drag on Tweedy Boulevard. I remember going there as a kid in the 80s, seeing the Rambos and the Rockies and all those 80s blockbusters in a single screen, gritty, dingy, but worked for really cheap $2 a pop tickets and popcorn and all that. So I have very good, vivid memories of going there with friends and my family to watch those movies. And then sometime in the 90s, like a lot of those businesses and those main drags just kind of went away. And then late 90s, early 2000s, there was a new purveyor that bought the property, and I don't know exactly what the origins of it, but I remember going there and seats were gone and built a kind of de facto stage. And right around that time, the thriving kind of ska and punk scene just kind of found a place to set up shop. I had a chance to see a couple of those shows, kind of in the back, as I was by that time I was in my early 30s and not wanting to look awkward with a bunch of teens there, but really amazing, vibrant shows with some no-name bands and then a couple of recognized bands in Los Angeles in that scene. And the energy, the vibrancy, the ability for young kids in the surrounding neighborhood to blow off some steam. That's kind of what what kids do, right? So harking back to my days when I was doing it in other spaces or in spaces, as we'll talk later, that were backyards and other warehouses. To serve the ability to have this space for both the audience to be able to be a part of it, but also for musicians to have a venue where they could play, and definitely not a pay to play like the Whiskey or anything. So a place where bands could come and sharpen their tools, and whether or not those bands were able to make something of themselves or get signed, it was a space where you could collectively gather together and enjoy the music and the scene and all the things that young kids do to blow off steam and be with each other and all the rest of it. So very good memories of this Allen Theater, and I think last time we drove by it, it's I think no longer. I think it's called boarded up and closed as that whole era has ended. But really awesome memories of seeing those shows, and grateful I'm sure for those kids to have that space, and I'm sure those kids who experienced it now in their 30s and 40s have a really great place to attach some really good memories to.
And then the next focal point was the Rainbow Gardens in Pomona. So the Rainbow Gardens was like this big ballroom that was there for quite some time. In the 1950s, where we pick up the story, it was a lot of big jazz bands were playing there, and so. But the clients, it's the 1950s, right? So the clientele was, it was all white. It was all white, and then Candy Mendoza was a Latino DJ that we learned about at that moment in time. And so he was a radio DJ. He had a lot of connections and just in the music industry, particularly when it comes to at that moment in time, Mexicans in Pomona, Mexican artists. And so he pitches the idea to the owners of the Rainbow Gardens, which it was the Thomas family. Hey, why don't you let us do a music event here with? And then he had lined up a Tejano artist to play that evening. They were a little skeptical about letting it happen, and I think they were skeptical in terms of the draw, in terms of the number of people that would actually show up to an all Spanish music event. And so he's like, let me just work on it and so see what we can pull together, right? So he pulls in a Tejano artist. The Thomas family they grossly underestimate like the market pull of these Latino residents in the Pomona area and maybe across the San Gabriel Valley. Like, they're not going to show up. It's not going to be that many. There's not that much pull. So I think he kind of going under those expectations, he understaffed the Rainbow Gardens that evening, right? So I think they only opened up a couple of bars, not all the bars. He didn't hire on all the security. He only brought on one security guard. And then the night of the event comes and they get overloaded with over 700 guests. So now the Thomas family is now kind of rushing to call in staff to come in, work the bars, work security, because now they're overwhelmed because everybody showed up to party. And so with it, I think unlike the Allen, where it was a cinema, it was a movie theater at one point, and then became a place for local punk and ska bands. This was always a music venue in one way, shape, or form. What was renegotiated here, though, what was reimagined here was strictly cultural, right? Where it was music in English and a white clientele, and that shifted, right? And so from that moment on, the Thomas family got to see what kind of market pull Latino residents in Pomona could have, and then Rainbow Gardens becomes far more multicultural from that point on. So I think the shift with this one is cultural, right? Like language, dress, culture. The Rainbow Garden, much like the Allen Theater, some of the pieces that we talk about today physically are no longer there. The Allen, no longer there. Rainbow Gardens, again, this was the 1950s. I believe in the mid-60s, 1965, it burned down and it was destroyed. So I think what sits at the location now is like this new modern apartment complex in Pomona. And but with it, right, it gave a shift to a new way to kind of bring other people into the fold that normally, traditionally and historically, did not have a chance. And so a lot of what we drew from in terms of the work we did and the research we did, well, on its own, this book by Matt Garcia, we drew a lot in terms of the history, economic, cultural history of the San Gabriel Valley. So a lot of the stuff that we learned about the Rainbow Gardens came from Matt Garcia. And also, Matt Garcia also kind of helped us kind of understand what took place at the American Legion Stadium in El Monte, and that's our next focal point. So in El Monte, the American Legion Stadium, it started off as this huge auditorium that was part of the high school at one point. It was part of the high school, and then I think the high school had some damage. It was destroyed, so they eliminated the high school. They kept the auditorium. And then they expanded the auditorium. So the auditorium became a place for sporting events. So like boxing, 1932 Olympics, I believe that's where wrestling took place for the 32 Olympics at the American Legion Stadium. And then little by little, they started doing concerts. And so with the concerts at this moment in time, this is I mean, during the 50s and 60s when segregation was really in full display across, not just city of LA, but the county of LA, right? So in terms of youth across Southern California being able to come together and have a good time and enjoy music with one another, legally, systemically, it wasn't allowed. Until Art LeBeau comes in and he identifies the American Legion Stadium in El Monte as the one place that he could use, because such restrictions on segregation did not exist in El Monte. So it was like, well, I'm using this space, and that's number one. And number two, the other restriction is underage concerts. Across the city of LA, concerts for those who were under the age of 18 were not allowed. El Monte, they were okay with all ages and that type of thing, right? So he identified this place, and so with Art LeBeau, and then bringing musicians there, Richie Valens, I think Little Richard, and so now you're attracting youth from all over LA County. So white youth from the West Side, black youth from South LA and other parts, local Chicano youth maybe from El Monte and elsewhere, now coming together and finally being able to kind of enjoy music and enjoy concert with each other. And with it, what we read with Matt Garcia is that it's like this intercultural exchange amongst youth, where like the youth from the West Side, they dress a certain way. The youth from South LA, they came in suits. Chicano youth, pleated pants with iron shirts, and they start to influence each other. So I think what's being renegotiated here with El Monte is for us, it felt like it was resistance to segregation, and kind of taking that down and being allowed youth from all over to come together, renegotiate the space, and have a good time and enjoy music with one another. The stadium itself also no longer there. I think after the 1956, 70s, they started to use it less and less. U.S. Post Office bought it, they took it down, so there's a post office there now. That much we know. If you follow on social media, if you follow the one guy that does LA in a minute, he does like these 1 minute clips of Southern California history. Well, he did a 1 minute piece on the American Legion Almani, maybe like in June of this, May or June of this year. I saw it and I thought to myself, we beat him to it, because we highlighted this a couple years beforehand. But he did a really good job of telling a similar story, right? So much so that the venue was known in music circles, so much that Frank Zappa even has a song called Memories of Almani because of the stadium.
So now we're going to be in the movement of the podcast. We shifted from more established places like a theater or an auditorium to lesser established places like a backyard. And part of this, the spirit came from my own experiences. I got a chance to experience backyards both in East LA and in South LA and in Southeast LA as well. So this is where my own kind of my initial consulting came in, and then we decided to add it as a focal point. But in general, just to put the context for the two focal points is one, we're going to be speaking in the second about punk bands in the 70s and 80s using backyards as those spaces to interact and perform. And then in the 90s with DJs, and I'll share a couple of small anecdotes of my ditching days at 9:30 in the morning, leaving Garfield to head out to these parties. But in general, the big focal points here is one, again, reclaiming a space as simple as someone's backyard, usually without parental consent, to gather and have that creative expression, and again, more of that kind of blowing off the steam. But it also allowed for a lot of youth to showcase their abilities, right? It's a place, again, even a dirt garden can serve as a space where you plug in instruments or plug in a turntable, and you're automatically in the limelight. But it also made it accessible. That's, I think, the other part of, as we were negotiating these conversations about, back to that question of accessibility. Aside from parents potentially not knowing, not consenting, but again, reclaiming it, right? At odd hours of the day or in the middle of the night, whatever the case may be. But it's about accessing, specifically in LA, where a lot of those places you weren't able to play, places like the Whiskey, the Roxy, or clubs on the West Side, or clubs in Hollywood, where you had to be a signed artist, or you had to be a recognized artist. And so, again, this idea of resisting when the spaces aren't allowing. I was explaining this podcast to my wife, and I told her she's a gardener, and so I told her, kind of like when you see those weeds break through like hard cement, how does that happen when it's a piece of agriculture that pops through a hard cement? So taking the backyards became a place where those flowers could bloom in the most random of places. And also these backyards for some bands, start that's their focal points, and they started the local music scenes. And so the first focal point is the backyards in the punk scene in East LA. And here I'll kind of put something outside of this slide, but whatever people's perception of East LA, when I actually first even entered the space in 8th grade, I had my own preconceived notions of whatever East LA was, even though I was coming from South LA and there's a lot of parallels. I had no idea that punk was present. Not only did I not know it was present, as I walked into my junior high and saw a slew of leathered, mohawked, pin-eared, who eventually became my friends, I had no idea that it had a long history. That punk music in East LA specifically dates back all the way to the 60s and 70s. And so that's, again, part of our conversation point. And then in the research phase that Roberto did, we found an artist called The Brat with the founder of that band, Teresa Covarrubias, who, again, played a huge presence, not only just as a punk scene, but also as a woman, kind of the front person of the band, and really kind of helped to establish a larger, well-documented East LA punk scene in the 70s. And essentially, as the mainstream LA punk scene in the 70s, again, was kind of showcasing the bands that we know, like the Germs and all of those bands that, of course, now are famous. So bands like the Brat, Los Illegals, and the Undertakers, again, building their own movement kind of inside. And these backyard parties, again, served as those initial seedlings to create those spaces in the East Side, again, being shut out by places in Hollywood and the West Side. And the beauty of these backyard scenes is they're so organic and holistic. They're kind of, they don't, I remember, you'd hear them in the middle of the night and these loud noises and you don't really know how it started, but creating that idea of this is our space, it's community based to a certain extent. It's that awkward, visual when you see a mosh pit and it looks so violent, so like disjarring when you see it, but then it's actually really tender and kind of soft when someone gets hit and get down. There's an automatic rule, you pick them up. There's no questions asked and nothing's done out of malice. So you have this interesting physical and you put that in context of the music that's being played. It's also very violent and aggressive, yet it's a place that creates so much like stark community. I vividly remember going to my first backyard and seeing the mosh pit, and again seeing that aggressivity. And then after it was done, it was all hugs and kisses. I was like, that was so strange and weird to see something like that, so tender and sweet, especially amongst Latino men who got that's physical affection like that doesn't share. But yet this place that's great.
Actually, to that point, think about my memories of going they were called gigs. They were called backyard parties. Like if a punk band was gonna play in someone's backyard, they were called gigs. And so when I was young and I was a skater and I would let's go to a gig, so and so's playing, and so you get there. And to Paul's point about you get in a pit and then everything's cool. Like going into the pit, I remember people, hey, no snappers, like, hey, nobody get out of line. Let's have a good time and then just let it be and be cool with each other after the fact.
Yeah, strange rules that apply to a place that obviously was meant to have no rules. So very, very interesting dynamic for the punk scene in East LA. And I also do want to highlight that although we focus here in East LA, the same thing was happening at the same time in South LA. So very two parallel movements happening, less than 15 miles apart. Very similar dynamics happening in both spaces. And this is again the other text that we drew from for that personal history of LA punk here under the big black sun by John Doe, and highlighting that big part, of course, John Doe being part of the seminal punk band X.
So John Doe is the bass player and founding member of X, and so he helped put the book together. And in the book, it's every chapter is a different person. So I think the first chapter is his girlfriend and co-founder of X. She does one chapter, and then the other chapter is a couple of folks from the Go-Go's and how they came up by way of punk, and then a few other, and also the Brett and Teresa Gurrias come out of this book. So.
And then the other focal point here for backyards across LA, but specifically we're going to highlight on East LA because that's where I had a chance, is in the 90s, the party scene, the DJ party scene that was developing. When I entered Garfield High in 1992, I again was having my own notions and stereotypes on it, and I was expecting to see a bunch of cholos because that's what was in the frame. Oddly enough, not so much. And as I was walking in there and encountering the friends and the culture of the high school, huge party scene and DJ scene. I was loosely affiliated with one called the Rebels. I was never officially joined, but I had friends there. And so I found myself in 10th grade. I was super big, still big nerd. So 10th grade, I found myself being peer pressured into going to these ditch parties. I had the pleasure of being a magnet student, so I vividly remember the first time I was able to, I decided to attend one of these. It was at 9:30, it was right after homeroom, because that's when attendance counted. So pretty much after that, you could disappear and no one would count because your attendance would be official. I remember vividly walking through the main hallway, the main building, and just walking out. Not a single person questioning my exiting. I walked just pushed the door open and it was right outside because no one would dare question the magnet students. Those are the ones you trust the least. So I remember walking a few blocks and we got some addresses and I arrived at this really nice kind of suburban house and hearing the in the background because it was 9:30 and the DJ was already set up, the music was set with the Mickeys and the Ciscos and the Wild Dogs. It was all that and it was just this. I had no idea it was gonna be this. And as the 90s DJ scene, and I remember vividly, music was wonderful. Great. I had two brothers two of my brothers were former DJs in the 80s, so I grew up with the DJ culture. I grew up with the white label records so that no one would know what you're spinning. And these cats had the same thing, very similar, but again with that kind of electronic, what now we would refer to as EDM, but that early kind of house music. Again, parents obviously at work, no one there, and these, 50 to 60 random teenagers partying it up. With all the accoutrement that comes with a party that you can imagine with alcohol and drugs all spinning everywhere and couples doing what they do at parties. But again, a space where at 10 o'clock in the morning, I don't know how these things never got broken up. because clearly they weren't supposed to be happening at 10 o'clock. But very similar to the punk aspect of it, reclaiming the space, again, unbeknownst to adults or the neighborhood, but again, a place where, potentially problematically, blowing off some steam where you should be in school, but again, having a space where you can have that community and share that space, enjoy the music that one enjoys, but really, of course, having, a good time. And then somehow I remember them somehow heading back. I commuted from Southgate, so I had to use the school bus system. So I do remember heading over to sixth period in the most inebriated states, and then heading back like if nothing had happened. I eventually got tired of it and kind of bored and head back to what was supposed to happen in 11th grade. But I do have very vivid, fond memories of those few ditch parties. And again, I'll emphasize again, what turned that into the backyards led me to then once I turned 18, do the raves and the eventual clubs. And an extension of that, in that official space and that official capacity. But it started in these ditch parties in these backyards. And it allowed me, and I'm sure allowed everyone else who maybe subconsciously, I don't think consciously they were acknowledging it, but it gave them a chance to be able to enter a larger space with the similar background, once of course they were of age. And it was, darker and better lit, but for the most part, that I think for me served as a space to really understand. And it wasn't until years later, as we spoke about this, how important those spaces were. Even though, of course, we weren't supposed to be there doing it, but that served as a space for us to understand the power of music and community and the shape of the context around it, which is what drove so much of our conversation.
Yeah, I think when you're using a backyard to throw a DJ party and so forth, you're not thinking of it as being revolutionary at the time. You just want to party. You just want to have a good time. You want to disco, so forth. But when you're a DJ trying to create a space for yourself where nobody else will allow you to come and perform and spin records, we drew on Jerry Mraz. Jerry Mraz, he used to be on Power 106, back in the 90s. He was a producer on Power. If anyone remembers Power Tools, back in the day, I think it was Saturday nights on Power 106 when they would spin all kinds of house and techno music. So he was a producer for that. Now I think he still does lectures in Chicano studies at Cal State Northridge. And so we listened to his interviews in terms of his experience when he was a DJ and he couldn't get booked at clubs in Hollywood or the West Side. So what did he do? He started doing backyards. And him and his DJ colleagues started doing backyards and creating their own space to be able to perform and spin records. And then a lot of what Paul's talking about in terms of what happened in the 90s, backyard parties, party crews and all that, they started to shift a little bit in the 90s and started to emulate gang culture and gang activity a little too. So it got a little too racy, it got a little too violent. So there's this decline of the DJ backyard parties in the 1990s. And from them, for Jerry and others, from their springboard was the backyard, right? And then from there, they started getting booked into clubs and so forth. And they moved on to warehouses and just other things other than backyards. And maybe some key takeaways, lessons of history and artistic expression, they exist everywhere. Unfortunately, for a lot of these spaces that we covered today, they no longer exist. So you could be driving anywhere and not know that there was a ton of local history and artistic expression that took place here or there or anywhere else. Case in point, like with Almani, and that there's a current U.S. Postal Office there now. The guy from LA in a Minute, in his video, he talks about how there's no plaque, there's no nothing to commemorate that there was an American Legion stadium there, and it did all this, right? Hosted the Olympics, boxing matches, and it was, and he even coins it, right? It's the birthplace of oldies. It's the birthplace of oldies, and that was thanks to Art Laboe that kind of brought all these youth from across Lake together. So there's history everywhere, right? And a lot of these stories, are lesser known. So how do we highlight those, right? Yeah, uncovering overlooked music, history of marginalized artists, youth, and communities in LA. Our goal was to make local history more inclusive by having voices often left out of, mainstream narratives, right? And plenty of historical knowledge and lessons to be uncovered by looking deeper into scenes of the underground, right? And then going back to the Brat and Teresa Rodriguez, if there was one quote that kind of kind of just kind of represented the purpose of the podcast and maybe even the purpose of today and just kind of experiences of the underground, it's this quote. And this is from her. She's like, I remember thinking I just wanted to be in a band. I wanted to write music and to sing with a band. That was the goal. It was simple. I wanted to perform for people. Getting signed and making a record wasn't in the plan at all. The goal was just to express oneself, to have a voice, and see what happened. And so I was like, that's punk. That's punk, that's underground right there. And with it, yeah, just a picture of the brat. You know, this is 70s and 80s, right? It wasn't Mohawks just yet. That comes later. I know, but this is Teresa and the rest of the brat in East LA, early 1980s. And with that, we say thank you. And do we have time for
Yeah, you have time
maybe a
for
couple
questions.
minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe a couple minutes of the podcast?
Oh, sure.
And then
Literally a couple weeks.
Just
Sure,
literally
go
timed
ahead,
it.
go, it's okay if we're a little behind, no worries.
Should be the problem.
yeah.
So we want to essentially capture and highlight music history that is specific to Southern California and even more specific to the West Coast, and even more specific here to the City of Angels.
Yeah, I think for the two of us, our focus on music in LA is for a couple of important reasons. Number one, both myself and Paul, we grew up here. We live here currently. So we know that there's a ton of music history that went untold, or at least that should be told and shared a heck of a lot more.
And also Los Angeles, and maybe even California in general, it's keenly positioned, obviously, as the entertainment capital. So there's so much music history to uncover and learn about. From artists and music producers to major music venues and recording studios, Southern California is like a time capsule in terms of the historical narratives behind that music.
You're right. There's so much history here. It's just, this is where music takes place, both live and recorded, but also in many ways, this podcast of ours, it's an archaeological dig. And then that's not my term, that's Paul's term. That's how he coined it when we were brainstorming this, And we want to commit to an effort to unearth the music history of say, marginalized artists, marginalized youth, marginalized communities across Southern California, but especially in LA. So with that, our goal is to make local music history in LA more comprehensive, more inclusive, by adding voices that often maybe don't make it to historical monographs, or maybe don't even make it to other music history podcasts. So with this in mind, the focus of this episode will be physical spaces here in LA. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also take a couple
Couple
questions.
questions?
We're a little behind, but that's fine. Yeah, I think people have questions.
Couple of questions.
We'll take them. Maybe we won't have answers.
In a mosh pit, did you ever fall down?
I did. And again, that tenderness and the rules of no snappers. Yeah, I was picked up and
No snappers?
no snappers.
No
That
snappers.
was a term in the '90s where basically don't be a jerk.
Okay.
And that part of that was that, like, when you see someone fall, even though you were the cause of it,
You pick them up.
you pick them up. And then that to me was so jarring, but also really sweet and tender that a weird sense of like safety in a space that is clearly the opposite of safe. Yet, yeah, it was just that was my first entry into like understanding the depths of these,
You would think that you're on your own, you're.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like unspoken rules.
Yeah, unspoken
right?
rules that were great.
I
Yeah.
think one time I caught an elbow a little too hard to the chest, and I called the guy, hey man, you stand for me. Oh, sorry man, I mean to. And that's it, right? And it dies right there.
And then right back at it. Yeah.
What platform is your podcast on?
It's on Spreaker. We recorded it on iHeart and then kind of the Spreaker platform. But we can we have links for all of them. So afterward, we had to divvy up in total, it's about like an hour.
It's an hour, 60 minutes. Yeah. So it was like each section is 15 minutes. That's how we could, split it up.
And then we, like, in terms of the focal points that we ultimately decided on, it was hard. It was hard because the history can go in so many directions. And at one point we talked about maybe like the jazz scene along Crenshaw and Central Avenue and how much is there's a lot of unspoken history there, and tell a little bit of those stories. And then we just had to narrow it down to this because we were running out of time. Otherwise, it would just make for a 3-week long podcast. So.
So we are actually presenting in the afternoon, and I feel like it's a continuation of this conversation because our project is on the Deep Roots documentary series where we've covered a lot of these same places, like the Crenshaw Continuum. We have Segregated talking about the backyard parties and SGB, and we did like a whole punch episode too in downtown
Nice.
LA. Yeah.
Nice.
So I feel like
We'll
it's
have
a
to
lot
check
of
it out.
continuity in our
We'll
project.
return the favor and be in the audience.
Yeah.
What time is that?
At 12:45.
Okay.
You guys only have one episode, right?
Only one episode.
Yeah, it was all in context of
Of
Professor
the,
and his course.
the class project.
So I don't know, there's talks of potentially this being a seed for,
What do you think you would focus on? I know you kind of mentioned the jazz scene, but any other like ideas of like what, like a continuation?
They think maybe a continuance, I don't know, we haven't talked about it, but a continuance of lesser known stories when it comes to music history. So it could be jazz, it could be, and that could take you down the road of multiple stories that were left untold, or just, not told as much.
Yeah.
but I think definitely in the spirit of keeping it to LA.
Yeah.
Or the larger kind of Southern California
Yeah.
area.
Like
yeah.
some oral histories,
Yeah.
maybe?
Yeah, similar to the previous presentation of potentially getting some, some artists or some people that we can come across who could actually speak on from first person.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's all, actually, we did he turned in the assignment, kind of forgot about it, and then up until the symposium and Professor Andy recommending us to apply, so now the conversation is back on our foray, so we'll see.
This podcast keeps, it was 2 years ago, so it keeps kind of coming back
Yeah,
to us.
so
It's,
maybe it's a sign, we're not sure.
So, Professor Andy, thank you. Thank you for letting us know here.
Yes.
Do you have any sound clips or access to sound from any of that music?
In the episode, yeah,
We played
Roberto
a
was able
couple,
to
yeah,
play a couple.
we played a couple songs. If we could have done something differently, is played more songs of the artists that we're highlighting, or if it's oldies and our LeBeau or the Brat and what have you, we could have done a few more songs, but yeah, there's like just a couple. I think the Starry Night is the name of the song by the Brat.
By the Brat, yeah.
Maybe if there's one more, and then. No? Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, we
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much. Appreciate it.